to protect personal data. And finally, personal conversations unrelated to the sessions are discouraged in order to prevent unauthorized disclosure of personal data. At this juncture, let me invite everyone for a moment of silence to feel God's presence in our midst as we listen to the prayer prepared by Mr. Alvenio Mosol, a faculty at the Department of Theology and Religious Education in the La Salle University.
Sa ngalan ng kaloobang walang kasing ganda at ng mukhang lubos na kaaya-aya at ng paramdam na tunay na nakagiginhawa. Sa aming pagtitipon ngayon, ibinabaling namin ang aming panalangin at pagninilay sa mga hamon ng paghalungkat ng kaisipan at kaugaliang mas nagpapahirap sa mga mahihirap, mas dumidiin sa paghihikahos ng mga biktima ng mga kalamidad dulot ng climate emergency. Akayin niyo po kami tungo sa kababaang loob upang kami ay makapagluksa sa aming mga kakulangan sa pagkalinga sa isip, sa salita, sa gawa, sa pagsasabuhay ng aming pananampalataya sa inyo, sa aming kapwa, sa buong sansinukob. At sa kabila ng mga pinsala na sanhi ng makasarili, mala-imperyo o kolonyal na mga kasalanan, higit sa mapangaping pakikitungo sa iba o sa pagganap ng papel bilang biktima ng hindi makatarungang paggamit ng kapangyarihan. Panibaguhin niyo po ang aming mga pananaw, tulungang maitaya ang aming mga katawan at kamalayan tungo sa kagandahan ng kalikasan at sa biyayang nagpapagalaw sa kaayusan at katinuan ng lahat. Siya nawa.
Thank you, Sir Al, for that inspiring prayer. Moving on, dear participants and guests, the theme for the celebration of the 500 years of Christianities are driven by the Post-Colonial Theory. To situate us for the talks and the conversation today, let me read this abstract that describes what Post-Colonial Theory is all about. Post-Colonial Theory interrogates the, quote, political, aesthetic, economic, historical, and social impact of European colonial rule, unquote, from the age of conquest to modernity. As a system of literary and cultural analysis, Post-Colonial Theory has roots in the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978. For Said, Orientalism demonstrates how every branch of knowledge, quote, is part and parcel of European hegemony through the process of colonial conquest and domination, end of quote. Colonialism has not really ended, but persists in other structures of domination today. In short, the world we inhabit can only be understood through imperialism and the worldview of enduring post-coloniality. The posts suggests more a desire to go beyond the colonial in all its manifestations, as expressed in various forms of resistance in the past and the present. In the Philippines, the post-colonial condition is defined largely, although not exclusively, through the lens of the Spanish Catholic imperial project. When we think of Filipino culture, we almost always conceive of practices that are fundamentally religious and colonial insensibility. There is therefore an inevitable correlation between the study of history, theological language, and political practice. This afternoon, we embark on a roundtable discussions that illuminates the complex narratives that gave birth to our sense of identities and nationhood. In commemorating 500 years of Christianity, we not only take account of our history, but more importantly, seek to critically and creatively reimagine theological language in ways that deepen and expand our understanding of what it means to be Filipino Christian today. So, we are almost ready. One thing more, during the roundtable discussion, please feel free to post your questions or comments, dear participants, in the chat box or in the Q&A button on Zoom or in the comment section of Threads FB page as this event is being live streamed. To introduce the roundtable panel, let me give the virtual space to our moderator, who is also a faculty at the Department of Theology and Religious Education in De La Salle University. Dear participants, our clap reaction for Dr. Michael Sapidosa Campos.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Ronnie. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us for our final roundtable in this year-long commemoration for 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines. So the process of the roundtable will invite three specialists, scholars, who will speak on the question of ecology and Christianities. And each one will present for about 20 minutes, at which time we will then invite them to engage each other in conversation. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free to post them, and then we will try to engage these questions soon after the conversation proper itself. To begin, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Maria Florina Aurelius Juan is an associate professor at De La Salle University in the Department of History. Her research interests include environmental history of the Philippines, history of disasters, history of leprosy in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, the Spanish colonial period, the culture during the Japanese occupation, and general topics about history and geography. In 2012, she won the Young Historians Prize of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Her book, Kasaysayan at Vulnerabilidad, Ang Lipunang Pilipino sa Harap ng Pananalanta ng Pesteng Balang, 1569-1949, won the 2019 Outstanding Book Award by the National Academy for Science and Technology. For this afternoon, Dr. Aurelius Juan will be presenting on the topic Teaching Post-Colonial Ecologies in Philippine Environmental History. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Aurelius Juan. Magandang hapon po.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Campos, and as well as our audience. All right, okay. I can see that our tech group has given me now the chance, the opportunity to share my PowerPoint presentation to all of you. Okay, let me just, sorry about that. I pressed the wrong one. Sorry. Just like what our dear moderator mentioned a while ago, this is the title of my presentation for this afternoon. I'd like to share with you the outline of my discussion. So of course, there'll be first an introduction, definition of terms. I'll be focusing more on some examples as to how early Filipinos conceptualized and how they developed attitudes to nature, particularly focusing on indigenous cosmologies and natural phenomena. I'm also interested to share with you cultural interpretations of disasters, such as, for example, earthquake, volcanic eruption, drought, flood, and locust infestation, after which I shall provide a summary and conclusion. Just like what was mentioned earlier, my particular academic training is in the field of history, and I've been basically teaching for the last 23 years or so, and these are my areas of interest. So that would be the reason why I wanted to share with you this particular topic. So I have two guide questions for our discussion for today. I'd like first to provide a very short definition of what is meant by post-colonial ecologies and why is it important to teach post-colonial ecologies as a part of Philippine environmental history. The first scientist to basically look at the definition of ecology is the German zoologist, naturalist Ernst Haeckel. And he defined ecology as the study of the relationship between organisms and the environment. His definition, as we will notice, underscored both biotic and abiotic aspects of nature. Post-colonialism, as earlier defined to us by Mr. Ronaldo Celestial, would not have one definition. But I do think that this one best sums up how I wish to apply it to my presentation. Aliyah Afzal wrote a thesis in 2017 about eco-critical post-colonial studies on humans, land, and animals. She argues that post-colonialism examines and responds to the cultural and ideological legacy of colonialism. It dismantles the social hierarchical structure, which is based on Western thought and epistemology, and provides an agency to the colonized and the marginalized people to speak for themselves. It creates a space where cultural, linguistic, and identity discourse of the colonized is formed. So with that, I would like to look at this passage here from the book Global Ecologies and Environmental Humanities, published in 2015, edited by De Lafray, Didur, and Kerrigan. Ecological transformation, according to them, is entangled with colonial expansion, capitalist industry, and globalization. It is clear, therefore, that imperialism affects both people and place. When any place is colonized, the environment is subjected to colonialism as well. Now, what about the term post-colonial ecologies? In a book edited by De Lafrey and Handley, published in 2011, titled Post-Colonial Ecologies, Literatures of the Environment, they mention that our definition of post-colonial ecology reflects a complex epistemology that recuperates the alterity of both history and nature, without reducing either to the other. Moreover, on page 13 of the book, of the same book, they mentioned to speak of post-colonial ecology is to foreground the historical process of nature's mobility, transplantation, and consumption. So at this point, I wish to share with you that the early Filipinos basically evolved a perception of and attitudes to nature. And I'd like to show this by drawing some examples from our indigenous cosmology. The early Filipinos' observations and interactions with nature produced a traditional knowledge and worldview that underscores the sanctity of nature and humans' oneness with it. So let me just show you that for the early Filipinos, among the indigenous groups, there is this concept of a supreme being or God who is treated as the creator of the world and of course of the first humans. Depending on the ethno-linguistic group, they are known by many names. Bathala for the Tagalogs, Kabunian for Ifugao, Kaptan for the Visayans, Pamulak Manobo for the Bagobo, and in this case, an artist's depiction of Magbabaya of the Bukidnon. Another aspect of our indigenous cosmology, which I would like to highlight, would be the belief that spirits and gods reside in specific environments and natural objects. And at this point, the example which I wish to share with all of you would be the Ifugao rice god, or the Bulol, which the people normally invoke its help during planting and harvesting season. The third is the spiritual personification of nature. In Filipino, nature is often referred to as Inang Kalikasan or Mother Nature. Here in this painting by Fernando Amorsolo, nature is personified or depicted as Mariang Makiling, a guardian spirit of the mountain after whom she was named. Here, she is portrayed as the protector of its rich bounty. How did the early Filipinos interpret certain natural phenomena? In a trailblazing research, the father of Philippine ethnoastronomy, the late Dr. Dante Ambrosio, conducted a fieldwork and published eventually a book about Philippine ethnoastronomy, wherein he revealed that the indigenous peoples of the Philippines developed a vast knowledge about the skies. Actually, our forebears treated the sky as part of their culture and would consult them for their variety of activities. So in this case, the example which I want to share with you would be a solar or a lunar eclipse. For the early Filipinos, they believed that animals have since time immemorial influenced the way people think and act. One such animal is the snake or the mythical dragon. Among Filipino ethnic groups, there are at least 3 snakes in the sky, which continue to influence their lives. And these are the following: the Naga, Bakunawa, and Laho. The sun or the moon do not just simply vanish. It is eaten or swallowed by a giant serpent called Bakunawa or Laho. What you are seeing in This particular slide would be a testimony or narratives coming from the friars who observed the following whenever there was a lunar eclipse. As you can very well understand, solar eclipse would be something rare, okay? And so the documentations left by the Spaniards, the friars, would pertain to lunar eclipse. So in 1620, Fray de San Antonio wrote, "Linamon pala ng laho ang buwan, kaya nangamarilim." So in short, he was writing about a lunar eclipse, buwan. So it's in Old Tagalog orthography, and the one responsible for swallowing the buwan was the laho. Again, in 1754 and republished in 1860, Fathers Juan Noceda and Pedro Sanlucar wrote, "Kinain ng laho ang buwan, linamon man din ng laho." And again, the message is clear. The one responsible for the eclipse is the laho. Fray Alonso de Mentrida in 1637 wrote, "Binakunawahan ang bulan." Bulan refers to buwan or the moon, and the serpent responsible for it is a bakunawa. What was the reaction of the locals? Well, the first reaction, of course, would be they were too overwhelmed, okay, with sadness, with grief, because they were thinking that if the snake does not let go of the sun or moon, they will live in perpetual darkness. So they should do everything in order to scare away or distract the serpent for it to let go of the moon or sun. So what the natives would do is to create deafening noises. In some parts, it was documented that some people also tried to slay the snake with their bows and arrows. Ambrosio noted that this practice of creating noise, supposedly again, so that the serpent would be distracted and it will let go of the sun or moon, continues even up to the present day. There are other beliefs associated with an eclipse. It was documented that pregnant women were actually told to refrain from looking up the sky during an eclipse, whether it's a lunar or solar eclipse, because she might endanger the fetus in her womb. And if that happens, when the child grows up, he might lose his mind. And at that point, people would solemnly pray to the gods and the deities so that the eclipse would be over as soon as possible. And darkness, of course, would be over and there would be light. Now, how did the early Filipinos live with the environment? At this point, we can see here in the slides that the emphasis is on interdependence, on harmony, and balance, together with oneness, with that feeling of oneness with nature. The early Filipinos, for example, studied the stars in the sky because of their affinity to them, as mastery of this knowledge was essential to the different aspect of their everyday lives. Once again, in Dr. Dante Ambrosio's study on Philippine ethnoastronomy, he was able to establish that the indigenous Filipinos developed, a nomenclature for the stars. An example here would be Balatik, referring to Orion, and the other one is Moroporo, referring to Pleiades. Ambrosio tells us that two appear from October to May in the Philippine night sky. This is the kaingin period for the Sweden farmers. They choose the land for kaingin around December and January. Clear it from January to February, let the cut trees and grasses dry during the hot months of March and April, and burn them around late April as the gentle northeast wind blows. So we can establish how important the study of the skies were, not just for any other reason, but it's because they needed to, so that they would be guided accordingly with their different activities. So that brings me to a problem supposedly conceptualized, okay, by experts on the environment. Okay, that brings me to the so-called practice of kaingin and gasak. So kaingin and gasak, Sweden type, it refers to a Sweden type of farming and agriculture which is practiced in the upland areas of the Philippines. I would say that there is this centuries-old narrative that kaingin and gasak harms the forest and the environment. In fact, from the time that the Spanish Inspección General de Montes was established in the late 19th century, they passed rigid laws in order to prevent the practice of kaingin. Because of that point of view, that this practice basically harms the environment. And this conceptualization of kaingin was carried on to the next colonizers, the Bureau of Forestry, including the Post-Colonial Bureau of Forestry office by the Post-Colonial government. So there was this attempt to discredit the indigenous population. There was this attempt to discredit, okay, the kaingin, and it was actually more of an attempt to prohibit the indigenous populations to practice their culture as they were being robbed of their land, so that it could be turned into monocrop plantations. Harold Conklin in 1957 lived among the Hanunuo Mangyan of Mindoro. And in a landmark work, he concluded that the practice of integral kaingin, which he referred to as a more traditional year-round, community-wide, largely self-contained and ritually sanctioned way of life, was not in any way destructive to the environment. So it should be noted that as much as the practice of kaingin had been vilified for centuries, recent studies have shown that several varieties of kaingin actually exist, and there are some which does not often result to the destruction of forests and loss of its natural resources. In fact, in 2015, a group of experts from Australia and Copenhagen came to the conclusion that until now, indigenous peoples in Palawan continue to practice integral kaingin by clearing smaller patches of forest for the production of subsistence food crops. After harvest, they leave the land fallow for longer periods to allow the forest to regrow and restore the productivity of the land. So they knew, the indigenous peoples knew how to basically make use of their environment, while they are very conscious of its limitations as well. Next, I want to discuss how disaster has been interpreted, okay, by our indigenous people, and how the conceptualization of this particular agricultural disaster shifted, okay, with the onset of colonialism. So if we look at Philippine mythology, one of the Visayan gods, known as Lalahon, was known as the goddess of harvest. So people would often invoke her help, especially if they want to get a bountiful harvest of crops. But at the same time, the people are also aware that lalahon could actually send locusts as a form of punishment for people who tried to displease her. So these voracious insects would attack croplands of Filipinos and would actually devour the entire plantation. And sometimes it would basically lead to the loss of crops, and therefore that would lead to hunger and starvation. Now, when we were colonized by Spain, there was this shift or transition to how it was basically interpreted, and how or what the recommendations were in order to prevent locust infestation. First, locusts, the attack of locusts are often interpreted as God's punishment to the heathens. So it was because they were practicing a so-called pagan religion that they are being punished by God through, again, these voracious insects who would land, who would alight in their field and eat, consume all of the crops. The church had the following recommendations to stop the locusts from devouring the crops. First, to say a prayer that the locusts leave soon without devastating their crops. Second, to hold a mass in the middle of the fields being ravaged by the locusts, or to have a procession of saints, once again, in the middle of a field being attacked by these voracious insects. The efficiency of this strategy is proven as soon as the locusts leave after polishing off or consuming all the crops. So if all of these recommendations are followed by the natives, surely it would leave soon. Okay, but of course that was after they're done, with what they went there for, and that is to devour, the crop. Now, this is a very interesting detail. This was lent to me by my colleague who collects novenarios. Okay, so here a patron saint was declared or was assigned, to become the patron saint of locusts or against locusts. Novena al Gran Padre de San Agustin, protector contra la langosta. So he apparently, the people were also advised, to do novenas to the patron saint, against locusts, which is San Agustin. I did not find, though, in the course of my research, how long should the novena be, and which people, or which groups of people practiced it. But again, this particular novenario existed. Okay. Now, what about disasters and colonialism? Well, if disasters, happen, and we are talking about what is often referred to as natural calamities. Okay, so in the case of earthquake, volcanic eruption, just like what happened early this morning, Taal had a phreatomagmatic explosion, eruption, and the tendency is to equate it with God's punishment. To whom? To the pagans who continued to practice their indigenous faith and native traditions. Okay, do take note that by this time, the men of the church would basically be aware, okay, of the scientific explanation of some of the so-called calamities or natural calamities. But then again, in the context of colonialism, particularly during the early period of Spanish conquest, it was projected, it was asserted by, especially by the friars, that this happened because the people are being punished because they are practicing, a non-Catholic faith. There are some instances when disasters were likewise interpreted as the work of the devil. So in a study conducted, for example, by Alvin Gamba, he established that if if a particular mission encounters, okay, accidents or mishaps in the middle of the sea, for example, they would be sending, missions in Mindanao, and if the vessel encounters, okay, typhoons, big waves, in the middle of the sea, then such disaster would be equated as a work of the devil. And they would explain it as something that prevents them, okay, from accomplishing their task in proselytizing the non-believers, okay, of the faith. Now, these are just some of the examples, given the time, of course, time limit for my presentation. I have shown that there is a need for a nuanced understanding of our indigenous native ecologies. Our forebears evolved a complex way of living with nature that was characterized by harmony, balance, interdependence, and oneness. Our ancestors developed what Gregory Smithens referred to as territorial, maritime, riverine, ecological knowledge. Finally, the study of post-colonial ecologies greatly contributes to Philippine environmental history in terms of scope and methods. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to conversing with Dr. Ibita and Dr. De Tavinier later. Thank you, Dr. Campos. I return the virtual floor to you po.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Aurelius Juan. We look forward to the conversations and questions that will emerge later on as well. And so we move on to our second presenter. Johann De Tavinier is Professor of Theological Ethics and Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic Universiteit Leuven. He is Director of Ethics at Arenberg, Science, Engineering, and Technology Group at KU Leuven. His research interests focus on fundamental moral theology, especially the history of the personalist tradition, the distinctiveness of Christian ethics, environmental ethics, evolutionary biology and ethics, and the use of scripture in ethics. He is also a specialist in 3 fields of applied ethics, namely food ethics, that is the right to food, engineering ethics, and animal ethics, specifically genetically modified animals, laboratory animals, and animal welfare. This afternoon, Dr. De Tavinier will talk on the topic, the planetary boundaries framework and ecological debt towards a radical redefinition of sustainable development. Welcome, Dr. Johann De Tavinier.
So, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. I will try to share my screen. Let's see if that functions. Okay. That should be. Okay. Could you see it? Is it okay?
It's clear.
Yes.
It's clear. Okay, then I will start. Thus, thanks for the invitation to be present today in Manila at this round table. I would like to thank very sincerely Dr. Florina, Aurelius, Juan, because my point of reference is Laudato Si, the encyclical of Pope Francis of 2015. And as you know, in chapter 2, 3, 5, 4, he takes over the See, Judge, Act methodology, which he learned from Juan Carlos Scanoni, his doctor father. In fact, what you have said about Dr. Said's Post-Colonial Theory, and the fact that at least there are not many countries in the world, like the Philippines, which are so Christian countries in the South, I mean. In fact, what is at stake is that in the Philippines, that's to my opinion, you have taken over what comes to a kind of critique in chapter 2 in Laudato Si. It is the fact that Latin Christianity, not Orthodox Christianity, that's the reason why the Pope has asked Patriarch Bartholomeus to help him in writing Laudato Si, the Patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, to refocus or rethink not only the biblical passages, but also, let us say, fundamental systematic reflection on the worldview which has been presented in the Latin Christian Church. The focus is here on, and that's the connection with Dr. Said, post-colonial theory. The focus is on the fact that with regard to the creation narratives in Latin Christianity, much more attention is given to the first creation narrative, which has a focus on what is called dominium terrae, dominionship, and which has, through its history, simply denied that other creatures, non-human creatures, have intrinsic value. Thus, it installed a kind of dualism, a kind of, let's say, not recognizing the interdependence, which is, of course, very much available in indigenous cosmologies or cosmologies. Thus, it installed a way of life which is, and I would agree, let us say, with the thesis of Lynn White, it's an old article of 1967, that Latin Christianity has presented itself as the most anthropocentric, this human-oriented religion in the world. And this has consequences. For instance, in my own, I'm an ethicist, in my own tradition, we speak about personalist morals, which means that in a kind of dualistic worldview, that animals and nature and ecosystems are at the disposal of human beings. They could be instrumentalized. And if you look to the tradition, to Norbertine abbeys and Benedictine abbeys, they did that really by introducing, by welcoming any new kind of technology, fertilizers, chemical inputs in agriculture. That has been, there was no opposition to this. Does it introduced a huge, to huge extent, a strong anthropocentric instrumentalizing mentality. And this is, of course, and that's my focus, I will also criticize a little bit Laudato Si. In chapter 5, now there is the cry, which can help us escape, what could help us escaping the spiral of self-destruction. Christianity has aligned with modernity. You have there also the connection with post-colonial theory. Modernity, enlightenment, also very anthropocentric. If I look to food production, to bioengineering faculty, well, with regard to laying hens, with regard to milking cows, we have at the moment the most efficient milking cow. Not much consideration is given to animal welfare, and so on. The husbandry systems which we are using for pigs, for instance, well, we keep pigs on concrete floors. What about their welfare? Is this what I would like to be kept in? Is this respectful towards the animal? These are the questions. In fact, Laudato Si is operating, and that's one of the rather, there are also positive points, of course, because it takes up the discussion about dominionary, about the long tradition of giving too much attention to the first creation narrative, and balances it. This will be important for the discussion with the second creation narrative, which starts in Genesis 2:4b, and which is much more respectful vis-a-vis nature. It works, Laudato Si works with a concept, an older concept of sustainable development, which is taken from the Brundtland report, Our Common Future from 1987. It works with the 3P approach, people, planet, profit, and at the end, it only offers a weak view on sustainable development. Since about 2015, there is in the scientific work, but it's not mentioned in the Catholic tradition, a much more stronger presentation on sustainable development, which is called the planetary boundaries concept. It works with 9 boundaries, so to say, which are scientifically based. It's based on an analysis of the risk that human perturbations will destabilize the Earth system at the planetary scale. Because it's a global view on the Earth. And you see with regard to some things which have been mentioned by Dr. Florina Aurelius, land use, with regard to chemistry, with regard to nitrogen and phosphor, with regard to global fresh water use. 70% of the global fresh water is used by agriculture, be it used in crop production, be it for animals, animal breeding. Biodiversity loss, all these things take biodiversity loss. We exceeded already the boundary. Well, if these boundaries are not respected, we risk a further warming up of a further raising of temperature. So the planetary boundaries should be considered as a new view that brings together the development of human societies and the maintenance of the Earth system in a more resilient state. It's called a safe operating space for global societal development. So here you have a good example. It's a bit detailed, it's maybe difficult to see, but here you see the evolution when you speak about colonization, but colonization should be linked to the anthropocentric view of Latin Christianity, together with modernity and the openness for instrumentalization of natural elements and its effect on emissions of carbon dioxide. Let us say the raising of temperature. Does it start somewhere with the industrialization, 1850, and it's raising. Marine fish capture, more efficient fish capturing systems, tropical forest loss, and so on, biosphere degradation. There's many examples, let us say, of the instrumentalization at work and the negative outcomes of it. The planetary boundaries is indeed operating, there's the whole system. If the boundaries are not respected, I think at the safe operating space, we will end up with further raising temperatures. And here you have a presentation of 2020 taken from the IPCC. What we now we are around, let us say 1.2, 1.2 increase of temperature. But if we, as you could imagine, if we would follow the same line till 2100, we will end up with 5 degrees, 6 degrees warming up. Because that would be a disaster, simply. You can think in terms of food production. At many places, land could no longer be used unless there will come a scarcity of water. We need much more water than in the past, and so on and so on. This is a kind of graphic to show that we intend to decrease the emissions by 2030, 2040, but that does not mean that temperature will decrease. We are still expecting, even after the lowering of, on a global level of the emissions, we are still expecting a temperature raise, probably somewhere a peak between 2060 and 2100. So the question is with regard to cosmologies and cosmogonies, what is happening to our common home in the Anthropocene? We call this period the Anthropocene, which is not only affecting our Western societies, but also a country like the Philippines, that's very much affected by that instrumentalization trend. Conscious of the enormous differences in climate impact and the urgent need to take decisions, Francis says, it is remarkable how weak international political responses have been. Superficial rhetoric, sporadic acts of philanthropy. Such evasiveness serves as a license to carrying on with our present lifestyles and models of production and consumption. Think at the position of China, the position of the United States. It's considered as a kind of, by the Pope, as a kind of self-deception. A kind of illustrations which are serving as conscientization. There are a lot of maps. This is a blue planet under threat. This is a prediction of how heat rises could hit world food supplies. If you look to China, for instance, and India, that's also the reason why China is now, for instance, in some African countries, is hiring 500,000 hectares in Tanzania to be sure about future food production, because they are foreseeing that the risk of no longer be capable to raise enough food for their growing population, that this will bring them in trouble, the regime also in trouble. This is a map about the water withdrawal to availability ratio. No problem for the Philippines, but look, Arabic countries, North Africa, United States, Southern Europe, India, there are a lot of very worrying, very high stress places where one is expecting big troubles. We are speaking about water. Projected changes in the number of hot days at 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius. Thus at the left one, 1.5, the second one, 2.5. And the days, you see the more red, dark red, for instance, it comes to 60, 70 days per year, more hot days. That will seriously affect only, this is 1.5, we are nearby 1.5 degrees. Thus that's an alarming situation. Another, which is for the Pope, let us say, a very sensitive issue. At left, you have the multi-sector risk map, where you have the highest risks according to the IPCC, the 2020 report. And at the right part, you have a prediction with how many vulnerable population per square kilometer with a lower income of $10 a day will be affected. That's for, let us say, for the Pope, an important consideration. In general, climate change put cuts at the core of lifestyle aspirations globally, and that's a clear message. Dus there is, in terms of an ecological debt, with regard to the causes, the countries which have benefited from a high degree of industrialization, the West, at the cost of enormous emissions of greenhouse gases, have a greater responsibility for providing a solution to the problems they have caused. So this is the outcome, let us say, of a long colonial period. Secondly, with regard to the solutions, buying and selling carbon credits, it's a quick and easy solution, but it may simply become a ploy which permits maintaining the excessive consumption of some countries and sectors. Thus he is blaming the North for the fact that they have caused something which will affect much more people in the South. So that's the global constellation. And this is, of course, unacceptable. For instance, we bought Belgium, the federal government bought clean air in Zambia 2 years ago for 2 million, I think, euros. That's a kind of practice in order to greenwash your conscience. A parallel could be made with vaccines, but I'm not dealing with it. So there is a need for a global fair sharing of the burden. For poor countries, the priorities must be to eliminate extreme poverty and to promote the social development of their people. Because they need a kind of, let us say, a kind of industrialization, a kind of development, although that could be discussed, what kind of development, in order to eliminate extreme poverty. At the same time, they are likewise bound to develop less polluting forms of energy production, but to do so, they require the help of countries which have experienced great growth at the cost of the ongoing pollution of the planet. And there you have the discussion about deforestation. For instance, around Leuven here in Brussels, the Zonian forest, we deforestate 90%, and it has been done by monks of the Norbertine Abbey of the park here nearby Leuven. 90% of that forest disappeared in the last 2-3 centuries. Could we, Western countries, forbid Southern countries no longer to deforestate? Under what conditions? We should immediately stop deforestation, but yeah, that kind of, these are primarily ethical decisions. What about the global commons? Global commons could be defined as high seas, atmosphere, outer space, and so on. God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members without excluding or favoring anyone. As you will see, as we have realized yet, northern countries have made much more excessive use of the global commons. Think at the atmosphere, think at clean air, the emissions, think at, and so on. The systems, we need systems of governments for the so-called global commons. Again, let us say a kind of reflection or link to vaccine ethics. This is a good article on eco-justice. But for the church, let us say we have to restore the balance between co-humanity, because we have a strong track record in helping others, social ethics, but how to balance it with co-creaturality. And at that point, we are really not very strong. So a fair share of the burden is asked, taking into account also that within countries, a greater attention should also be paid between people who are rich, people who are poor, people who are making, also in the Philippines, who are making much more use of the global commons in terms of emissions, in terms of car use, the use of fossil fuels, and others who do not have the capabilities of doing this. And the Pope is presenting an old idea. We have to go back to cooperatives as examples of alternatives, while diminishing the pressure of the market economy. Dr. Florina Aurelius was mentioning local communities producing food. Well, for instance, a cooperation or a cooperative structure which sell also their products. It's not very competitive. It's not competing with the market economy, with the big retail, but that would help them to survive and to keep their much more moderate and eco-friendly way of production. Thus, new forms of cooperation and community organization can be encouraged in order to defend the interest of small producers and preserve local ecosystems from destruction. We have to liberate ourselves from the dominant technocratic paradigm, and so on. Dus adopting less polluting means of production and opt for a non-consumerist model of life. Because he is bringing in one of the four cardinal virtues, temperance. Yeah. People have to participate in planning processes and project design. Environmental impact assessment should not come after the drawing up of a business proposition or the proposal of a particular policy plan or program. It should be part of the process, and local population should have a special place at the table. So they should defend their particular interest. Grassroots economic organizing, workers' cooperations, solidarity, economy. This is the new goal. It should always be kept in mind that environmental protection cannot be assured solely on the basis of financial calculations of cost and benefits. The environment is one of those goods that cannot be adequately safeguarded or promoted by market forces. That's also a strong statement, I would say. It's against any kind of, let us say, the dominance of the instrumentalization, which is still going forward. In fact, we have to reconsider growth, process development. I'm finishing. A decrease in the pace of production and consumption. We have to accept reasonable limits and even choose a decrease of growth. We have to redefine our notion of progress, and we have to become attention. We have to show attention for the fact that sustainability, a lot of sustainability talk, is a kind of recuperation. Let's say, like the triple P. It's often presented in business models of companies. There is the need for reconciliation with creation, which has cognitive, affective, spiritual aspects. There's the need for ecological conversion. There is the possibility for all of us. I introduced a picture of Levinas, of course, on the small goodness. And finally, there is a reference made to the Ceres Sapientiae, to Mary, Queen of all creation. She grieves for the sufferings of the crucified poor and for the creatures of this world laid based by human power. Co-creaturality, co-humanity. Looking to this world with the eyes of wisdom. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. I will close my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. De Tavinier. We look forward again to engaging you later on after the presentation from Dr. Ibita. And so we move to our final panelist. Dr. Maria Maricel S. Ibita is Associate Professor of the Department of Theology at the Ateneo de Manila University. Her research focuses on narrative, poetry, and metaphor studies in the Bible, feminist liberation, social science, trauma, and ecological hermeneutics, along with Jewish Christian sources for biblical interpretation. For this afternoon, Dr. Ibita will present on Biblical Pedagogies for a Transformational Post-Colonial Ecological Education. Magandang hapon po, Dr. Ibita, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campos. Salamat ng marami, Mike. Thank you also for the presentation of Dr. Aurelius Juan and Dr. De Tavinier. I think that maybe right now we are really following the See Judge Act because Dr. Aurelius presented on our pre-colonial and colonial mindsets, and then Professor De Tavinier discussed in quite detail with some criticism the Laudato Si. um, letter of Pope Francis. So right now, I will also delve on that, but maybe I will also now be in terms of the action. So let me just share my screen with you so that I could expand on what I would like to impart with you for today. Thank you again for the introduction. Let's continue our dialogue. Today, I will share with you biblical pedagogies for a transformational post-colonial ecological education. Let's start with colonization and the environment. Colonization is very complex. While it has positive effects, it also has negative consequences. Like, for example, Bauman here says that the science of ecology, or words about the house, find its genealogy in the era of European colonization. And in fact, it began as an effort to classify the flora and fauna that Europeans came into contact with and claimed to discover in some cases, though through the process of colonization. And these new discoveries were not only of mere aesthetic curiosity for European colonizers, but also of economic interest. For Libby Robin, for example, even ecology can be called as the science of the empire. For Ruel Pagunsan, the American colonization also perpetuated the utilitarian regard and commercialization of our natural resources. It's also interesting that even the scientific advances during those times were done from this mindset. In his discussion on the ecological dimension of the Filipinos' colonial oppression, Ray Raluto also highlights the local context of poverty and ecological crisis and their theological challenges. In the following slides, we will see how the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, CBCP, has advocated for the integrity of creation since 1988. As Raluto's exposition still relies on obvious. I'm sorry for that. It stopped. I'm gonna just stop share and then repeat it. Sorry for that. Creation-centered Bible text without including the advances in biblical ecological hermeneutics. This is what our discussion will offer in a bit. The CBCP and ecological concerns. In this groundbreaking 1988 document cited by Pope Francis in Laudato Si, Bishop Leonardo Legaspi rightly observed that we will not be successful in our efforts to develop a new attitude towards the natural world unless we are sustained and nourished by a new vision. This vision must blossom forth from our understanding of the world as God intends it to be. He underlined the biblical roots of this text and the encouragement to work for justice and to preserve the integrity of creation are two inseparable dimensions of our Christian vocation to work for the coming of the kingdom of God in our times. To have our own Filipino theology of creation, we need to remember that our action response for peace, justice, and integrity of creation in our schools and institutions should not just be activities in and of themselves. They should underpin all our efforts. Because of this, I was so disappointed that we didn't have the theme of ecology and sustainability in the preparations leading to the 500th year of celebration of Christianity in the Philippines. It is thus very encouraging that the Filipino youth proactively wrote an open letter to the church hierarchy in 2018, telling them of their critique and aspirations on our social life, especially their demands on education and the environment, which are very much linked to economics, politics, health, and dialogue with cultures, especially with the indigenous peoples. In the CBCP reply of Bishop Bases of Davao to the youth, He underlined that by demanding for life, human dignity, the environment, justice, freedom, and peace, among others, the young people showed how they want to be supported and how they have strength and capabilities to attain these dreams. In a very comprehensive document, the CBCP in 2019, through Bishop Ballas, recalled this exchange of letter with the youth in the CBCP's urgent call for ecological conversion, hope in the face of climate emergency. This document celebrates the Church in the Philippines' 3 decades of commitment to ecological concerns. It underlines the immediacy of the continuing destruction of our common home and how believers can respond according to Pope Francis. That is by upholding the integrity of creation as the eighth work of mercy. As a moral and ethical issue, the climate emergency response also has theological, moral, and biblical basis. It echoes Patriarch Bartholomew's call to acknowledge our contribution, express our contrition, and begin our actions for reparation and restitution by acknowledging the inherent right of creatures, just as written in Laudato Si 69. For Pope Francis, we need a paradigm shift as we recognize our intergenerational responsibility and need for solidarity. One of the challenges I see in their highlighting of the scriptural basis of our efforts to care for the planet is that it's mainly focused on biblical texts that are obviously creation centered. And this is what we also need to address as a vital part of the moral and religious dimension of the call for action and ecological conversion. As you can see here, we as educators need to integrate the care of creation as our common home in our teaching and practice of Christian discipleship. Likewise, we also need to integrate Laudato Si in the curriculum and strategic plans of Catholic educational institutions, including seminaries and religious formations. Finally, we need to also popularize and integrate the understanding of climate change and its mitigation in our formation programs. In this year's CBCP challenge of Bishop Ambo David, he calls us to integrate the care of creation as our common home in our teaching and practice of Christian discipleship, as manifested in our stewardship of resources, formation, and the defense of life and advancement of the rights of nature. We are urged to implement education and information campaigns about these concerns, as well as hold dialogue and learning platform with the lens and with wisdom from our indigenous peoples. How do we do that? Biblical ecological hermeneutics may be of help. We recall the task of Catholic schools to provide biblical formation for the young so they can envision and adopt proper values to build the reign of God. Good biblical interpretation is vital for as Lynn White, the historian whose criticism of the anthropocentric character of Western Christianity has been one of the great impetus for an ecological lens in biblical interpretation, said, what we do about ecology depends on our ideas of the human-nature relationship. More science and more technology are not going to get us out of the present ecological crisis until we find a new religion or rethink our old one. Here are some practical biblical pedagogies for a more transformational and post-colonial ecological education. The first is the set of questions from storyteller theologian Megan McKenna. First, how do you feel about the story and entrance of the participant in the narrative by being in touch with oneself? Second, what's true in the story allows the universal character of the story to come up. And finally, what's disturbing about the story allows the reader's critical engagement with the story and generates new insights for contemporary times. As not all of us are well versed in Hebrew and Greek, and we only have the received biblical text, ecological reading can also be facilitated by narrative analysis. We need to pay attention to the literary context, the plot and setting of the biblical story, of course. To dig deeper, characterization can be done since the actors in the narrative move the story forward. And this is very easy. Look at the square figure on the screen. We have likewise The first column contains what the character says or the words, the same with the others. The second column contains the deeds or actions of the focus character and the other actors. This simple technique can be applied on the divine, the human, and non-human creatures, which we pay attention to. Way we are able to see how salvation history includes cooperation from all members of the created community. While they are based from exact and social sciences, the eco-justice principles of the Earth Bible Project of Australia in 2000 and their hermeneutics of suspicion allow us to be more inclusive of the non-humans in reading the Bible. The six principles are intrinsic worth, interconnectedness, voice of the earth as subject, purpose within the greater cosmic design, mutual custodianship, and resistance against injustice. In 2009, another offshoot from the critique and appreciation of the Earth Bible Project is Hilary Marlowe's ecological relationship to the created world and how he acts within it. What effects do the actions and choices of human beings have on the non-human creation, and vice versa? And what is the unique relation between God and humans, apart from non-humans, between God and non-humans, independent of the humans, and between humans and non-human creation, apart from the Creator? While Hilary's ecological triangle pays attention to the relations between A and B, B and C, and A and C, thereby highlighting God's independent relation with the non-humans, Hilary agrees with my criticism of her work that the interlocking dynamics between them be also highlighted. So I modified the ecological triangle with these three questions while still paying close attention to the biblical text. All of these methodologies from McKenna questions encourage close reading of the text from the part of the religious educator and the students. In doing so, alternative ecological insights emerge from the text. To even make ecological reading more exciting and acknowledge its complexity, my Nordic colleagues Tina Nielsen and Anna Solivag proposed to include the Earth Charter, an international, intergenerational, and multi-sectoral declaration of fundamental values and principles considered useful by its supporters for building a just, sustainable, and peaceful global society in the 21st century. The pillars of the Earth Charter are the following: respect and care for the community of life, ecological integrity, socioeconomic justice, and democracy, nonviolence, and peace. In my continuing conversation with Tina on ecological hermeneutics, she challenged us how we can incorporate the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals proposed by the UN to its member states for completion by 2030. She calls this sustainability hermeneutics. While Tina was working on the conceptual framework of sustainability hermeneutics, my sister, Dr. Malu Ibita, and I also underlined the use of gender and trauma studies in ecological hermeneutics as seen in our forthcoming publication on combined biblical ecological trauma hermeneutics in a post-Hayan context. Of course, we need to end on a hopeful note. This is where we see the possible contribution of the eschatological reading of the scriptures from ecological lens. In this 2010 book of Raymond Biringer and Mary Elsburn, various questions confront us to deepen our appreciation, critique, integration, and recontextualization of the Bible today and inspire us to participate in God's reign. The visions we see in the biblical text can be enriched by the practicality of the Earth Charter and the UN SDGs. So here are our first set of questions on the vision of the future that is discernible from the text. In this second slide, we look at the inclusive and inclusive dimensions of the scriptures. As most of the Old Testament texts are related with the creator or kingly images of God or with God the Father, and the New Testament is immediately connected with Jesus, the Son of God, the normativity of the future project highlights the role of the Holy Spirit in the vision of God and in the people's inspiration and courage to make God's dream a reality for today. This fifth set of questions are still very important as it's composed of reflexive or self-criticism evaluation questions. And for me, it's very important that we as interpreters and teachers are aware of our biases and advocacies, including whose sector or community do we serve and are accountable. So now, let's have a sample text. For our application, I chose peaceful, productive tools benefiting everyone. Pope Francis also cites this message often, like in his 2013 Angelus, 2014 Orbi et Orbe, in his Angelus again in 2015, in his celebration of the Passion of the Lord as COVID-19 rages in 2020, and in his Pentecost message in 2021. In contrast with Isaiah 2, 2-4, Micah 4, 1-5 includes the figs that support the vines. In antiquity, figs are important for its nutritional, medicinal, and sacrificial values. Figs with raisins and wines were believed to quiet the hearts of the gods. Destruction of the figs or non-enjoyment of its fruit imply divine judgment and punishment. The flourishing and fruition of figs indicate the blessings that obedience to the covenant brings, as well as wellness, prosperity, and peace, especially when people are described to be sitting under it. Eschatologically, Micah 4, 1-5 envisions a world where the transformational instruction that God teaches involves peoples and nations. This inclusive Torah expands from individual to collective participation, encompassing spiritual, political, legal, economic, ecological, and cultic dimensions. As long-term investment in wine growing implies stability and settlement, an eschatological reading entails ending the evils of war and the building up of a new world of global peace and a planetary sustainability. People then can sit under their own vines and fig trees. In normativity of the future is understood as time-bound, tomorrow, and also includes an ethical claim which impels that the health of the ecosystem is sustained for the future generations. Therefore, Micah's vision of vines and fig trees also include responding to the challenges that we experience today, that of COVID-19 pandemic and the ecological crisis. An example is the need for green spaces in COVID-19 management, especially in urban settings. While the global process of wine production and consumption was affected by the pandemic, one of the sectors who suffered most during the pandemic, coupled with militarization and the series of strong typhoons in the Philippines, were the farmers, the fisher folks, the indigenous peoples, and our Muslim brothers and sisters. In the country and in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic likewise called into question how humanity crosses the boundaries of our wildlife, resulting in the increased variance, severity, and spread of zoonotic diseases. Globally, the pandemic uncovered the incompetence and abuses of autocratic and populist regimes, whose response to the medical crisis was largely fueled by militarization and disinformation. Putin's government's aggression against Ukraine today threatens not only global oil supply, but also the world's chain of food production. Therefore, to sit under the vines and figs as the prophet envisions requires local and global responses on sustainable agronomy, food security, absence of war, and upholding of democracy. Here, the Earth Charter's pillars of respect and care for the community of life, ecological integrity, socio-economic justice and democracy, nonviolence and peace come together. Moreover, the inbreaking of an inclusive, just, and sustainable planet, as Mike envisions, even more requires the realization of the UN SDGs today. Using ecological and sustainability lens on Micah 4:1 to 5 demands a call for a solidarity that recognizes the interrelatedness of all creation. In Micah's vision, the strengthening of the pillars of the Earth Charter and the UN SDG attainment, we see the inbreaking of the spirit through the collective efforts of the United Nations, its member states, and the civil society. In them, the flourishing of the vines and the figs become a literal and symbolic litmus test on how the covenant with God is obeyed and how the global planetary community can build back better in this COVID-19 pandemic era. May this dream come true through our small and big efforts, and as we choose our leaders in the coming May 9, 2022 elections. Thank you very much for your attention. Any comments or questions or insights? Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Ibita. And thank you again to all of our panelists. We just wanted to remind everybody that if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A box. And for our panelists, if you wish to respond to any of these questions in written form, please feel free to do so. Before we proceed with the conversation, I wanted to remind everybody that our sponsoring bodies for this discussion includes the Department of Theology and Religious Education of De La Salle University, the Institute of Scriptures, the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines, as well as the Theology Department of the Ateneo de Manila University. And so I'd like to open the floor and invite Dr. Ibita, Dr. De Tavinier, and Dr. Aurelius Juan to perhaps pose some observations or questions with one another.
Maybe I will start. I would like to ask the two of them. First would be maybe for Dr. Aurelius Juan. Both of them would be about sustainability. One is, do we have an indigenous concept of sustainability? Do we have a word for it or a concept for it? And for you, can you expand more on the question now on sustainability? But maybe let's hear first from Dr. Aurelius Juan.
Thank you, Dr. Campos and Dr. Ibita. As regards the first question, if we do have a local term for sustainability or sustainable development, because the two are related. We have a faculty member from the Departamento ng Filipino at Panitikan ng Departamento ng Filipino, sorry, UP yung Panitikan, at De La Salle University, who wrote her dissertation. And as far as I remember, it's Likaskaya na pag-unlad, but that would be the local term for it. Now, responding to the first question, this is the second one, responding to the first question, if that is something intrinsic, okay, to our culture, then I would say yes, because earlier I highlighted how our perception of and attitude to nature is basically characterized, okay, by harmony, balance, oneness, interdependence. So the attitude is to harness, for example, resources in our environment, or perhaps do some changes with it for as long as it does not affect, okay, their environment. Because again, it's something very natural, to the people. They know the ecological limits of the environment that they were in. So I mentioned that example about the kaingin because I too had the same experience, if I may share a bit. I wrote my master's thesis back late 90s, and it was an institutional history of the Inspección General de Montes which was the forerunner of the Department of Natural Resources and the Bureau of Forestry during the Spanish colonial period. And because my work is archival in nature, then of course the sources dictated that I should write, what I got, from the sources. And at that time, there was not at that particular time, after I defended my master's thesis, I did not include any discussion, okay, on the kaingin or the gasak. It's just that I stated there that part of the definitive laws passed by the Spaniards included a prohibition on the conduct, okay, of kaingin or gasak, okay, and that's it. Because again, that was an institutional history. But later on, when I published portions of that master's thesis, I began to inject, okay, modern interpretations, okay, of gasak and kaingin. And well, basically, to cut the long story short, it was vilified by our colonizers, both the Spaniards and the Americans. The post-colonial government, the Third Philippine Republic and the other republics that followed, vilified the same practice, okay, and in the process ignored the bigger picture that the deforestation of our mountains is caused not by the integral kaingin being practiced by our indigenous people, but primarily by illegal logging, by usurpation of lands, because they have to discredit these indigenous communities because they have plans of selling it to private companies so that they could turn it into plantations. So monocropping is more dangerous to the environment than the integral kaingin being done by the indigenous people. Thank you.
You're muted, Dr. Ibita.
Yo, absolutely.
There are a couple of questions. With regard to some questions are evident, I think indeed we need solar panels. That would be really helpful. We have to get rid of fossil fuels, gas and oil, and the sooner the better. That's very evident for me. With regard to knowledge about ecology and causes and so on, in fact, what Florina said is that older people, like my grandparents, also my parents, were very familiar with ecology, with nature. Dus for them, it was, they understand really a kind of interconnectedness. They did not need much knowledge about it to know already how important it is. But we lost that kind of connection. Dus that's and we have, through eco-spirituality, to a better knowledge of ecology. Somebody was mentioning it's helpful indeed. If you consider with your pupils the quality of the air in Manila city, you can measure that. You can, from a scientific viewpoint, and this is what we need, because it moves people. It got people interested. What is the quality today, for instance? What will it be next day? On Sundays, when there is less traffic, for instance, how is that affecting? Because our breath, we are breathing, our lungs are dependent from that quality. And bringing that up, learning people how to be attentive to these kind of things is essential. And lastly, I want to say something about when we speak about ecological conversion in Laudato Si, there is something very important in combination with a better knowledge about ecology, which we need. We need people who got an interest in birds, know everything about particular birds, I admire this. I do not have the knowledge, but people who could recognize, let us say, 100 birds, different, that biodiversity in all its aspects, apple trees, That's amazing. We should promote this. But there is also an affective and a spiritual part next to the knowledge, and that should be combined. It's only by walking, by being in nature, by sensing, let us say, natural effects, that you become passionate about the importance of nature for us, for our well-being, mental well-being, but also physical well-being. And that gives a kind of, I believe, that's a presumption, a kind of satisfaction in life. And this is, let us say, in combination with eco-spirituality, something we are able, it does not cost much, we are able to develop these kind of things. There were other questions about coastal areas, but raising awareness for climate action and so on. Dus it's by little actions, quality of the air in the cities, walking in nature, by creating an interest, let us say, in biodiversity with regard to flowers, with regard to, you have people uneducated, but who have a sense of the beauty of different dahlias or tulips or whatever. I admire this. That should be promoted.
Thank you, Dr. De Tavinier. I was curious about your description of human wellness, and I was reminded of a topic that Dr. Ibita raised in her presentation, justice. So maybe I'd like to begin with Dr. Ibita with that one.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mike. Siguro this would also be like an answer to some of the questions that we have in the Q&A, and also for Annie Rose. Annie Rose was saying that it's just 8 years na lang before the 2030 due date, not only for the sustainable development goals but also for the warnings that we have in terms of the warming of the planet. And this is one of the reasons why I really presented those developments in biblical research, because as I think Professor De Tavinier already mentioned that earlier, that Lynn White back in 1967 really criticized that the Christianity, the Western Christianity for that, is so anthropocentric, and in that way we really echo somehow the findings of Dr. Aurelio Juan in terms of the pre-colonial, and then we have the colonial mindset. One of the problematic things really there is the interpretation that we have of the scriptures. Like, for example, in terms of Genesis 1, we think like that we are the pinnacle of creation, that God just, said very good when the people were there. But actually, it's when we use the ecological hermeneutics, for example, and look at the non-human beings and see how God was relating to them, we could see that like for 5 days, God is already saying, good, 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 good. And so the people cannot just say that they are just the ones that are really good. So, also we can see there that God also has like a direct relationship with the plants and animals that's very independent of the people. So if people are just thinking that they are like the best of God's creation, when we return to the text and have this kind of viewpoint of really trying to look for the non-humans, we could see that hey, I think we are wrong. So there's one article by Bergman that really fascinated me, because the title was "Climate Change Changes Religion," and we should. We really should try to look at our religious tradition. The other thing I think that is very practical in terms of what I have presented earlier is that we can also use it in terms of our myths and legends. If we can return to our myths and legends, pre-colonial, and even actually popular culture, and we look at it from the viewpoint of how are the non-human creatures presented there, we can critique and we can also gather new insights that would make us realize what are we doing really to our beautiful land, and do now, so we can avert the really terrible situation that would befall us if we don't stop being so self-centered. So I was just actually right now, for example, thinking of yesterday, there was this Twitter trend about Parex, the expressway that they would like to construct along the Pasig River. And a lot of people are really, like saying stop, the parishes, the other stakeholders. But of course, we also know that money talks, and unless we really have government officials and people in the education and department, whether it is from theology, but I think really also in terms of political science, history is very important. So we can.
And the Benedictines, but you also have Trappist monks. And Trappist monks always have refused a kind of, in their forms, a kind of instrumentalization. They are particular practices they are not accepting. For them, for instance, the rich traditions we have about fasting has been remodeled, rediscovered. That's a tradition which we have. We also have a rich tradition on festivities in relation to seasons. We lost that mainly. We have introduced in our church life a kind of linear from Alpha to Omega, but we can make use of our seasonal approaches, which are often nature related. At the beginning of the planting season for agriculture, for farmers. There are many, many things, let's say. There is in the tradition also enough inspiration for conversion, I would say, but we have to rediscover it and develop.
The other thing that I wanted to just sort of see as a through line was this notion of debt that Dr. Tavinier was talking about. So the ecological debt that in so many ways, actually, Dr. Aurelius Juan referred to as the process of allowing our relationship to the earth to be cyclical. So kaingin allows that space for activity as well as rest. So it reminds me of the theological concept of Shabbat, the idea of allowing the land to lay fallow. So how can we rethink the concept of debt as also the place of entering a new rhythm?
Mm-hmm.
This is a question for Dr. Aurelius. It's important. These questions are the most important things, because we have to rediscover part of the tradition and re-strengthen, let us say, practices we have lost. But that's a very good question. Rhythm. Think about in relation to nature. And winter you have some,
Mike, I would just like maybe to add to that. Usually we think about death as, like the stop of life. And if we return to the Garden of Eden, it's like...
It's about death. It's about death, Maricel.
Death, but utang.
Death as utang. Okay. Sorry. When it comes to maybe the ecological death, I was also struck by that earlier. Sorry. That really could be one of the ploys, so that you can go over the rules of in terms of ecology. Because I remember that, for example, when we buy a plane ticket, isn't it that usually it has this corresponding ecological footprint something, so it could of course be used as as an excuse, so you can travel the world, etc. But I guess that we can also maybe transport that in terms of tourism. When we go as tourists and we leave our garbage, I'm just struck of this by this, because for example, when I went to Palawan, one of our last frontiers, it actually it saddened me that I see there a lot of little plastics of sachet of shampoo and etc. So ecological debt or footprints is actually not just done by by flying or by transport. We also do that in our everyday life. In fact, I think the poorer the nation, the more that we have ecological debt or footprints. What am I saying? I remember before when back in the province when we were little, that when a household would lack cooking oil or something, like they just bring a container to go to the sari-sari store to buy a cooking oil. But right now, I think we don't find that a lot. What we have maybe now are, like plastic containers, and even those small amounts. So the smaller the amount, we think that they are like individual packets, and they are very convenient for us. But for the in the long run, it's not really. And the first ones who will be affected are again, like the poor people. So I guess the ecological debt that we are saying is of course the it's so ironic, because for example, in when we were living in Belgium, like since you don't have those small stores, you buy in bulk, but our poor people cannot do that, and therefore, in buying the small things, we also produce a lot of plastics and everything. So the ecological debt is also has a lot of things to do. Yo, after the
Just to add to that, when we speak about ecological debt, we are also indebted, like one of the questions, to nature. We are also indebted to creation. We are also indebted to animals. If they have intrinsic value, which they have according to Laudato Si, then we have to put also this question very central.
Thank you. And just being mindful of time, I wanted to at least raise this question that Dr. Aurelius Juan described when she spoke of the indigenous sense of the personification of nature. To what extent does the idea of personifying nature potentially aggravate our ecological crisis? And to what extent can that also mediate some of these crises today? Nakamute po kayo. Yeah, perfect. Salamat.
I'll try to fix it. Okay. To some extent, it would, as you were saying, somehow mediate, how we protect our environment. Because earlier, I tried to show an example of how Mother Nature is personified. Of course, it's very common for us to address her, di ba? Female, feminine, which is, of course, she has all the characteristics of being caring, sustaining, okay, protecting her children. But once you earn, the ire, okay, of Mother Nature or inang kalikasan by several forms of transgressions, then she would be ready to send, okay, some form of, or for lack of a better term, punishment, so that the people would realize the consequences, of such. So at least in that sense, somehow, I suppose, the people would be more careful of committing, these so-called transgressions, so that they could, still earn the favor of inang kalikasan or Mother Nature, and continue to reap the bountiful, harvest, okay, the bounty of nature that she is giving, okay, to her children. And before I give the floor to Dr. Tavernier, I just wanted to react, okay, to the last topic, that we had, and that's the reason why in my conclusion I still stand, okay, by what I mentioned, that there is really a need to study our native ecologies. Especially in the Philippine case, we have so many ethno-linguistic groups, and you will be pleasantly surprised to learn about the immense knowledge that they have vis-a-vis nature and the use of environment. And it is something that to lament that I think the way we think about the environment right now is mostly passed on to us by again or based on Western epistemologies and ontologies, and it's not new here in the Philippines. The field of anthropology, for example, would have specific courses that take up or discuss this particular set of topics. Personally, since I handle a special course on Philippine environmental history, that's why I decided to share those thoughts with all of you. That somehow, when we talk about Philippine environmental history, it's not just about deforestation per se. It's not about the contamination of our water systems, but there is this need really to go back to what we had as a distinct culture. We have to be aware of our native ecologies. Thank you, Dr. Campos.
And passing it on to Dr. Tavinier, I'm just being mindful of time. We're almost closing up, but please go ahead.
Very short. Thank you very much for this. I just want to add that this is a sensitive issue in the Catholic tradition. For the first time in Laudato Si, mentioning is made of Mother Earth and Mother Nature, but this is not personified. It's not, I would say, immediately one says there is also a kind of fragility in nature. There is a lot of physical evil. Insects could, viruses, fungi could destroy your crops. Dus there is also a kind of responsibility, and it's a bit, let us say, that tension between what kind of responsibility do we have to intervene into natural processes, knowing that when what is often the case in traditional communities, if you are not using pesticides, not at all, then you run very high risk. Your yields could be in a particular year. So that's a kind of balance, and that's the hesitance, let us say, to speak of nature. Respect, okay, nature deserves respect, but it's not sacred. That's a point of attention and discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. De Tavinier. And I just wanted to invite all of you to look at the chat as well as some of the Q&A, because it's very rich. And please consider that we have the opportunity to connect with these scholars moving forward. But at this time, I'd like to thank Drs. Ibita, Dr. De Tavinier, and also Dr. Aurelius Juan for this rich conversation. And I'd like to pass this on back to Mr. Celestial. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, dear speakers, Dr. Florina, Dr. Maricel, Dr. Johan, and of course, Dr. Michael, for such a very rich, insightful conversation. And dear participants, we all agree, we can all agree that they all deserve our round of applause. And we give them our round of applause, guys. The conversation was really so interesting that I've noticed the number of participants, 100 of them, or almost 100 of them, remained attuned, remained tuned into the virtual conversation up to this time, from the very start up to this time. So that's a sign really that our participants are so interested in this topic that we have in this RTD. And as Dr. Michael has mentioned a while ago, since you have posted your questions while the talk was ongoing and the conversation was ongoing, many of your questions have already been covered. And having said that, we can now proceed to the part when we have to give our commendation to all the invited speakers who have made this afternoon event truly a memorable one. We have gained new knowledge and insights from them. And to show our heartfelt appreciation, we will now give them the certificate of appreciation. And again, this certificate of appreciation is conferred by the different institutions or organizers coming from the different institutions who work together to make this event possible. The Department of Theology and Religious Education of De La Salle University, the Department of Theology of Ateneo de Manila University, the Institute of Scripture, and the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines. Present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Maria Florina Aurelius Juan, Dr. Johann De Tavinier, and to Dr. Maria Maricel S. Ebita for invaluable contribution as resource speakers in the roundtable discussion series, Post-Colonial Christianities in the Philippines, 500 Years and Beyond, Christianities, Ecology, and Post-Colonial Encounters, held on this 26th of March, 2022, 2 to 4 p.m. Philippine Standard Time via Zoom and Facebook live streaming. Signed by Dr. Lysander Rivera, Chair of the Department of Theology and Religious Education, Department of De La Salle University, and Mr. Rayuel Rito Senyo, President of the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines, and Dr. Ruben Mendoza, Chair of the Department of Theology at Ateneo de Manila University. So guys, let's give our heart icon, our heart reaction to once again express our deepest appreciation. So to officially mark the end of the program, Dr. Fides del Castillo, also a faculty from the Theology and Religious Education, will give us the closing remark.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm so delighted to be part of this roundtable discussion, which happens to be the last activity of the 500 Years of Christianity series hosted by Ditre of De La Salle University, Manila. I still recall how the faculty members of the Department of Theology and Religious Education planned our year-long celebration of the quincentennial birth of Christianity in the Philippines. Our celebration began when we signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the International Association for Mission Studies in January of 2021 and with Cayo Doven in May of the same year. These MOUs were followed by webinars, roundtable discussions, and an international conference on catechesis and religious education. The department offered engaging and relevant webinars on the flourishing of faith related to indigenous peoples, empirical theology, religious education, scriptures, social teachings, values education, basic ecclesial community, Christian leadership, gender, and post-colonial discourses. Through this year-long online activities, we had the opportunity to critically reflect on various issues, challenges, and realities that we confront daily. These were opportune times to revisit, to reflect, and celebrate the working of the Holy Spirit, our ultimate partner in spreading the gospel of Christ. the Spirit energizes us to bring God's love and grace to our brothers and sisters in our communities. In March 2021, Pope Francis celebrated the Holy Eucharist at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome to mark the 500th anniversary of Christianity's arrival in the Philippines. In his homily, he acknowledged the witness of faith that the Filipinos offer through our discreet and hardworking presence. At the same time, he urged us to persevere in the work of evangelization. The Centenary of Christianity is an opportunity for numerous Filipino Christians like us to celebrate God's gift, which was freely given, and the responsibility to sow the faith. It is also a time to search and rediscover within the Filipino culture that traces God's presence. Such traces, which are translated in Filipino as bakas by Filipino theologians, the late Dr. Jose de Mesa and our colleague, Dr. Rebecca Cacho. It can point us to where we should go and challenge us to become sacraments of God's benevolent love in the world. In our efforts to commemorate the 500 years of Christianity in our university and in our country, we hope to bring to the fore our vocation. This means preaching, serving, and witnessing God's kingdom, especially in the struggle against injustice, oppression, apathy, corruption, and dehumanizing situations in our communities, our country, and the world. Hence, we take our cue from Jesus, who showed us how to truly love the Father and his neighbors. Evidently, none of this would be possible without the selfless dedication and commitment of the DITRE faculty, students, staff, our speakers, our DLSU administrators, and our partner institutions. So I thank all of you for graciously giving your time and expertise that refreshed and allowed us to critically reflect upon the meaning of the Christian faith in our more modern times. Thank you too to those who attended the monthly webinars. May the message of our Centenary, which is inspired from the Gospel of St. Matthew, remind us that freely we have received the faith, freely we give it to others. Thank you so much, and God bless everyone.
Okay, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Fides, for giving us this closing remark. And guys, dear participants, this program will not be over unless we have a community picture. So, and of course, the evaluation link and attendance as well is now shared in the screen. So please, while you are accomplishing the evaluation form, which is also serving as your attendance for this afternoon event, we will be having the community picture. Okay, please open your screen, and our tech team will take the picture. Wait, let me stop share. Yan.
Only the organizers are able to say turn on the the video.
Okay.
So okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's it.
Okay, let me once again share the attendance link and evaluation link. Wait. And the attendance, the perfect attendance, In the RTD series, we'll give 12 CPD points because our RTD series is an accredited program. And the certificate of appearance will be released upon the completion of all the RTD, of all the RTDs. And this is the certificate of appearance that you will receive upon the completion of the link that was shown a while ago. And again, this is the certificate of appearance is awarded to the participants for completing the roundtable discussion series, Post-Colonial Christianities in the Philippines, 500 years and beyond, signed by the chair of the Theology Department in De La Salle University, Dr. Lysander Rivera, and Dr. Mariel Abante, the CPT Manager and Corporate Secretary of the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines. And it's now time to end the program. We won't take so much of your time anymore. And as we part ways, and let us all together recite the Lasallian prayer. Dasalin natin ng sabay-sabay ang panalangin ng Lasalliano. Sa ngalan ng Ama, ng Anak, ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Ipagpapatuloy ko, O Diyos, ang lahat ng aking gawain upang ikaw ay lalong pakaibig. San Juan Bautista de La Salle, panalangin mo kami, mabuhay ka Jesus sa aming mga puso, magpakailanman. Ano naman ang Anak ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Yay!
Thank you, everyone.